Hello everyone, in this video we are going to see about the exception handling in Java. Let us first see what is an exception. Exception is an abnormal condition in the execution of an application. The exception handling in Java is one of the most powerful mechanism to handle the runtime errors. Actually, we have two type of errors: compile time errors and runtime errors. When there is some syntax error made by the programmer while writing the program, and those errors are caught in the compile time, those errors are called as compile time errors. After being executed, the program checks for the data structure or any other compatibility inside the program and the internal of the system. In such a cases, it come across some error called runtime errors. So these type of exceptions, that is the abnormal conditions, are handled by the exception handling mechanism in Java. And this helps to maintain the normal flow of the application. Suppose the application starts working, and if any error come across, the system will not stop because of this error. It will move as if nothing has happened. That is the concept of maintaining the normal flow of the application even if the error has occurred. Some of the exceptions are class not found exception, IO exception, SQL exception, remote exception. What is class not found exception is, suppose the class name is not found, and in that case the exception will be raised like this. Sometimes any error in the IO, that is the input output, happens, that is done by the exception, IO exception. SQL exception, sometimes there may be possibility that some SQL commands are not able to executable in the system. So there we come across the concept of SQL exception and remote exception. There are some exception in deployment or some other remote processing, that is the remote exceptions. And now let us see why the exception occurs. There can be several reasons that can cause a program to throw the exception. For example, opening a non-existing file in your program. For example, you are using a file program and you are not opening the program, or you are opening a program which is not, we are opening a file which is not existing. That time an exception may be raised. The network problem, there may not be any connectivity while you are passing some data from one machine to the other machine. There come across the concept of network problem, connection problem. And bad input data provided by the user. Suppose the input given by the user may cause some exception, that is called as an bad input data provided by the user. And let us know the difference between the error and the exception. What is the error is, errors causes the system crash or the out of memory. That means they are concerned with the hardware part of the system. So that may cause the system to crash or stop for some time, and that is called as an error. And what is exception is, and again these errors can happen only during the runtime. Okay, and then what is exceptions is, they are all the problems which can occur at the runtime and the compile time. That means it can happen in both runtime as well as the compile time. And when it happens is, it happens when there is some error in the code written by the developers. And let us see this table and the list of the errors. There are exception and errors. These are all the list of exceptions, and these are all the list of errors. So what is the list of exception is, so you can see here the IO exception that come across when input output problem happens. SQL exception when happens when the executing the SQL, that is a standard query language commands. And the class not found exception happens when the Java is not able to locate the class which has been mentioned. And the runtime exception, that exception can be of some type, it will see in the next slide. And what about the errors is stack overflow error, virtual machine error, or the out of memory error. What is stack overflow error is, the stack may be of, the capacity of the stack may be reached. That means we will come across the stack overflow error. We know stack is the part of the memory storage. And virtual machine error is all about, suppose when the JVM is able to access the bytecode, or it is doing some virtual operations. In that case, it may come across some error called as a virtual machine error, and then out of memory error. So here the data may cross their limit of the memory that has to be occupied. So there we come across the concept of out of memory error. So these errors, the stack overflow, the virtual machine error, as well as this out of memory error will they are called errors that will cause the system to stop, but these exceptions can be handled by the user in the code itself. So what are all the exceptions available here? Arithmetic exception that happens when any arithmetic expression is solved, for example a divide by 0 of that type, and null pointer exception that happens when their memory pointer is referenced, and then number format exception happens when there is some calculation mismatch in the format between the input and the output. And then index out of bound exception. What is the index out of bound exception? Is the array index out of bound exception, or then string index out of bounds exception. Here these both are arrays. This is the numerical array and this is a string array. So suppose the content of the array or the number of elements of the array exceeds than the defined limit that come across the concept of the index out of bounds error or exception. So now how to handle those exception? Java has these keywords in order to handle those exceptions. First is the try. The try keyword is used to specify a block where we should place some exception code. The try block must be followed by either the catch or the final. It means you can't use the try block alone. There should be a catch or a finally block followed by the try block. That means this try block contains some exception, the codes in Java which helps to handle the exception. And next is the catch keyword. The catch block is used to handle the exception. It must be preceded by the try block, which means we cannot use the try catch block alone. It can be followed by the finally block later. That means try, catch and finally. So try comes first, catch comes next, and finally comes last. The finally block is used to execute the important code of the program. It is executed where an exception is handled or not. So here finally is the default block. Whether the exception is handled or not, it will come across and by default it will execute the code in the finally block. And throw is the keyword that used to throw an exception. That means it has to raise an exception, the name of the exception. What is the throws is, the throws keyword is used to declare the exceptions. It does not throw an exception, but it specifies that there may occur an exception in the method. It is always used in the method signature. Actually, what is method signature is method definition. The function, when we declare the function, we can use this throws keyword while defining the function. And now let us see an example of the exception handling. Public class, here are the keywords. Java exception example is the name of the exception, and as usual the function starts with the public static void main string args, and this is the try and this is the catch block. So this try block contains some code written by the user. What is the code here? Int data is equal to 100 by 0. Here we come across the problem of divide by 0, because once you divide by 0 the answer will be infinite. That infinity cannot be mentioned in the system. So that will cause an exception while doing the arithmetic expression evaluation. So the name of the exception is catch. Within the block, within the catch, the bracket names that gives the exception name. What is the exception here? Arithmetic exception, and we are using the object called E. So arithmetic exception is the class and E is the object. And then you have to just give some message as we wish. System.out.println the message what you have got in the try block. So and then rest of the code, it goes as usual, the system.out.println the rest of the code. So here this try block gives some expression by which the exception may be raised, and the catch blocks gives the name of the exception and then how to handle those exception. So try and catch are the must, and finally is the optional. It may or may not be available. And now you can see the output of the program here. So exception in thread main java.lang.arithmetic exception. What does it mean is, Java is the main class, lang is the subclass, and arithmetic exception is the error, that is the exception class. Okay, and the exception name is divide by 0. So when this code is executed 100 by 0, it will raise the exception as divide by 0 to say that it cannot mention the data as divide by 0. And then rest of the code, as I have mentioned here, after this catch block is handled, remaining code of the program will be executed as usual. Likewise, here you can see system.out.println rest of the code. So try and exception are used to handle any exception that happens. After that, the code goes as usual with the rest of the program. And let us see here in this slide about an user defined exception. What we have seen in the previous slide are the system built-in exception, where the error or the exception caused only by the internal functionality of the program, or it is built in already in the Java program, in the Java compiler itself. But in the case of user defined exception, the user can define an exception on its own, on his own. For example, here this part of the code creates an exception to say that if age is less than 18, you are not eligible to vote. That is not valid. That is an exception. If otherwise, you are welcome to vote. This is a simple logic to say the user also can define an exception. So how it goes as usual, class and then the name of the class, test custom exception 1. Here the custom exception is customized by the user as he wishes. One example is given. We can define as many example as we wish depending upon the application what we are using. So static void validate int age. So this is the function name which is going to validate the input, which is age. Based on this age is less than 18 or greater than 18, we are going to throw the exception or to do the rest of the program. So here static void validate int age throws invalid age exception. Here the name of the exception defined by the user is invalid age exception. It's like a variable name. You can give any name as we wish, but the name should be meaningful to the process where for what we are using. Since we are using this for the invalid age, we are using this invalid age exception. Here you can see the throws and the throw keyword. This throws keyword comes in the method signature. That means it is coming in the definition of the function name declaration, and this throw comes in the exception handling part. Okay, so you can see if age less than 18, throw new. So new is an operator and invalid age exception is the exception we are defined in this signature, and the message we are going to give is not valid. Else system.out.println welcome to vote. So here this is a part of the program where the input is got from some other part of the program, where we are giving the age of the candidate as the input value. That input value is received and this is checked against this value, and this exception handling part of the program handles the exception to say that if the age is less than 18, you are not eligible to vote. If it is greater than 18, we are eligible to vote. So throw keyword, so this is the example of the user defined exception. So we have given the difference between the throw and the throws keyword. Throw keyword is used in the method body to throw an exception. You can see here this is the method body. In this method body we are using this throw keyword, while throws is used in the method signature. This is the method signature. That is the method definition, the name of the method and the parameters. So this throws used in the method signature to declare the exceptions that can occur in the statements present in the method. So then one word question we can answer: what is the difference between throw and throws? So now this is how the exception handling is done in Java, and hope it will be easy to follow, and thanks for watching.